Good. Right, yeah, so thanks everyone for joining today. We pulled this session together at quite short notice, given all the announcements last week, and some of you were reaching out to us directly, so we thought it would be a really good opportunity just to get everybody together in what is obviously a huge impact on all of our exports to one of our biggest markets. And I'm sure many of you know Jim Kilmer already from the Opal Group. Jim's been to some of the trade shows. He's done a number of online sessions for us and is working directly with a number of you one-to-one. So what we're going to do, the structure of this is we're going to get Jim just to chat to us for about 10 minutes or so, just on what's been happening and his thoughts. We're also joined by Jamie Craig from WTA Logistics, who I can't actually see yet. If you are there, Jamie, if you
Jamie's
can.
on. I see him down there at the bottom
Is
of
he
my
down
screen.
there? Ah, right, excellent. Okay, so Jamie, we'll come to you after Jim. And with Jamie, we'll just look at a couple of the issues that some of you might not have had to deal with before around the practicalities of coping with these as well. There is a chat box if you wanted to pop in any questions as we go along, do please pop them in there. And if you want to actually ask a question in person when we get to the end, just pop your hand up in one of the reactions and I can come to you. So I think Simon's only staying for 30 minutes. We'll try and cover the basics of it as quickly as we can and then hang on at the end. So Jim, let's go directly to you as the man in the market and very much welcome your thoughts.
All right. Well, Sandra, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jim Kilmer. I'm the managing director of the Opal Group. We are a back office service provider for the fast-moving consumer goods industry in the U.S. About 85% plus of our clientele are international manufacturers who are exporting product to the U.S. So, as you might imagine, it has been an eventful week for us. What I thought I'd do is I'd sort of give a quick introduction to the status quo and how folks are reacting to this, some do's and don'ts recommendations that we have at this point. And then I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for Q&A. But just to kick this off, first thing I want to make super clear is that anyone who tells you they know exactly what's going on right now is definitely selling something, because no one knows what's going on. I don't think even people in the administration know what's going on and are kind of making up a lot of this as they go along. So on a day-to-day basis, things are subject to change. The last 60 days, things have been on again, off again, on again, off again. We really don't know what's going to happen. And the unfortunate consequence of that, as I suppose we'll get into a little bit later, is that sometimes enforcement of those things is a little bit inconsistent. And what's happening at one port may not be happening at another port. What one agent decides may not be what another agent decides. So there's just sort of a lot of chaos right now. But let's start out with generally what happened. Well, the Trump administration advertised that they were going to be applying reciprocal tariffs to essentially all U.S. trading partners. What they charge us, we'll charge them, is how it was being billed. Turns out when the announcement was made, it was absolutely nothing of the sort. The tariffs really are aimed at trade deficit reduction, where all they really did to come up with their formula was they took a given country's trade deficit with the U.S., divided it by their total exports to the U.S., and that's the magic number they came up with. So, you've probably seen some of the oddities in the news of, tiny little countries getting hit with, 45% tariffs, and they themselves don't have any import tariffs. Well, that's the reason why, because it turns out this has nothing to do with reciprocity, nothing to do with actual tariff levels. This was, targeted straight at U.S. trade deficits. However, couple of other things on that. They didn't include any type of services. The only thing they included was hard product, raw materials and product. And countries with whom the U.S. has a trade surplus, including the U.K., were not spared. So that minimum 10% that was applied to everybody, the best that anybody can come up with is that, the Trump administration is just trying to get leverage to essentially bully folks around and extract more favorable trade deals. So, that's kind of where we're at. But the thing to bear in mind here is that, trade deficits are neither good nor bad. As a famous economist once said, I have a terrible trade deficit with my grocery store, which is true. I buy a lot of groceries from the grocery store. It's funny how the grocery store doesn't buy a whole lot of groceries from me. So that is a trade deficit, but it's not good or bad. It's just a thing. You have something I want, we come to a term, we're willing to buy it. But that's where some of these tariff numbers have gotten really wacky, where Lesotho is hit with a 50% tariff and Cote d'Ivoire was hit with a 42% tariff, I believe. Well, they don't buy, they're developing economies. They don't buy a lot of US goods, but Lesotho exports diamonds, Cote d'Ivoire exports cocoa. And so that's where, we don't know what's going to happen, but some of this just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And, when Americans start seeing the impact of this, we don't know how the administration is going to respond. But it's not like we're about to, suddenly have the southern United States spring up with cocoa plantations. It's not going to happen. So the net effect of this is that, chocolate prices are just going to go through the roof. And when we get to Halloween and Christmas this year, Americans are in for a heck of a surprise because, Cote d'Ivoire is not going to be buying a whole lot of US goods and we're not going to be growing cocoa. So the current methodology that they've put in place is just sort of nonsensical. But from a UK manufacturer's perspective, we're recommending folks basically look at this from three levels. You've got practical, legal, and strategic. And I'm going to focus on the second two first. Legal, I don't know that any of you will be directly involved, but there are a number of lawsuits that have already been filed, and there's more expected to be filed. But the whole tariff situation right now is really based on some shaky legal ground. The legal authority cited by the Trump administration for imposing them was a post-World War II bill called IEPA that allows the president to declare a national emergency and take certain measures. However, that bill, nowhere in its text does it mention tariffs. And nor do any of the other legal authorities cited by the Trump administration for applying these. On the other hand, the Constitution specifically says that the power for taxation, duties, excise, and so on and so forth is exclusively reserved for Congress. So as this makes its way through the courts, it will be very interesting to see how the courts interpret it. Likewise, if you've been paying attention at all to U.S. politics or legal issues, the current conservative Supreme Court fairly recently issued some consequential decisions where, one, they reintroduced what's called the major questions doctrine, basically saying that executive branch agencies can't sort of step outside their box and interpret the rules in a way that affect major questions. And well, if upsetting the global, trade system is not a major question, it's hard to imagine what might be. And likewise, they killed something that was called the Chevron deference, which basically meant that executive branch agencies could, we had to give deference to executive branch agencies when interpreting the law. So courts were basically, very loath to step in and say that the executive branch couldn't do something, because if they had been empowered in this area by Congress, then the executive branch had wide latitude. So because they didn't like what the previous administration was doing, they shot down Chevron deference. Well, that now has a direct bearing on what's going on now, where, executive branch agencies are operating way outside of their official delegated authority in a number of different areas. So, I'm not a betting man, and I'm not going to take the over-under on what's going to happen in the U.S. court system, and I would recommend that you don't either, because whatever happens in the court is going to be a trailing indicator. It's going to be kind of slow, but it will be very interesting to see if the U.S. Supreme Court manages to twist itself into a pretzel to both support its most recent decisions, as well as somehow say that the Trump administration has authority to levy these tariffs and do what they're doing. So watch this space. Strategic is going to be of more direct importance to you, because one thing that American suppliers, retailers, manufacturers, everybody's looking at right now is supplier diversification. Because you never know if you're going to wake up one morning and suddenly one of your major suppliers suddenly is subject to a 25% tariff on a whim, just because somebody decided they didn't like something. And so everybody, regardless of the outcome of this, is looking at supplier diversification right now. And the fact that the UK only has the 10% base tariff actually puts you a leg up above many others right now. And so, sort of now's the time to kind of take advantage of the chaos, take a look at your prospects, take a look at your customers, and see if there's a way to leverage the situation, because 10% ain't great, but 10% is a lot better than what others are facing. And everybody, industrial, food service, retail, everybody's looking at supplier diversification. The other thing is a perception of friendliness, where the U.S. does not have a lot of friends right now, and is actively alienating some of its closest ones in Canada and Mexico and elsewhere. The Commonwealth, as it were, and the UK in specific, has in many ways, kind of maintained a positive public sentiment. The fact that the UK has a trade surplus, or the America has a trade surplus with the UK, probably helps some of that, where nobody's really specifically targeted the UK right now. And so, leveraging that perception of friendliness of, hey, we don't know what's going to happen, but, trade with the UK is likely to remain stable. We're not likely to, suddenly wake up to 100% tariff overnight like other countries might. You can leverage that. And last but not least, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, is transfer pricing. If you're selling to an importer or selling directly to a retailer, well, there's not a whole lot you can do. But if you have your own U.S. entity and your UK manufacturer is selling to your U.S. entity, you have a little bit of strategic control over what's called transfer pricing, where many companies are selling to their U.S. entity with margin baked in for the home company, but others are selling at cost. And transfer pricing is a complicated legal topic. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to give you specific advice on how to calculate it. But if you have a U.S. entity and you are taking margin when you do that, as opposed to leaving profits in the U.S. entity, well, that's going to give you some wiggle room for negotiations, because that means you can drop your transfer pricing, which creates a lower cost basis upon which that tariff will be applied. So if you're manufacturing something for $1 and selling it to an importer for $2 or $3, well, you might be able to manufacture it at $1 and sell it to your own U.S. entity at $1.10, and that dramatically cuts that tariff. It cuts it almost in half. So that gives you some wiggle room in negotiations with your customers. But what everybody is here to see is the practical. So what do we do on a practical sense? Well, I am here to tell you that if you need to take a price increase, take a price increase. Because right now, everybody in the US is trying to figure out what they need to take, not if, but what they need to take in terms of a price increase. Because bear in mind, even US suppliers use imported product in an enormous number of cases. Like 60% of fruit and vegetables and other sort of perishable goods are imported. More than 35% of U.S. manufactured goods are either imported or use imported ingredients. So U.S. manufacturers are being hit by this as well, and everybody's raising price. And if there is one thing that the pandemic taught us, it's that even companies who are not necessarily directly impacted by this, they're going to see prices go up in the market, and they're going to see an opportunity to capture margin. So prices are going to go up for folks even who aren't imported, because they're going to be able to do so. Love it or hate it, welcome to capitalism. So that's kind of where we're at. But the piece of advice that I can give you is that if you do need to take a price increase, only do it once. Because right now, in the initial aftermath of this, if you can come up with a good, supportable, reasonable number that you're going to be able to survive on long term, and you take that price increase, you're not going to get that much of a fight at the moment. But if you come back in 60 days and have to do it again because you've miscalculated, then you're going to get a battle royale. But there's another thing to consider when it comes to pricing, and that is because all of this stuff is on again, off again, on again, off again. It's adjusting up, it's adjusting down, and nobody knows what's going to happen. If you read your U.S. customer vendor agreements, there is something in most of those agreements called price protection. And so if you raise your price 10, 15% now, but then come back in 90 days because the UK has negotiated a free trade agreement and say, okay, I want to drop my price, retailers under most circumstances are authorized to do what's called price protection, where they essentially will deduct the cost, that cost difference for the inventory that they already have in stock. And obviously that'll be a big problem for you because you paid the tariff or they paid the tariff, someone paid the tariff when it came into the country. The goods sitting in the warehouse were at a higher cost basis. So if you take a price increase and think that you might need to decrease it in the future, make sure that you have an addendum to your vendor agreement, that it's clearly documented, because what you don't want to have happen is somebody ships in a whole bunch of product, shoves it in the warehouse, and then they come back and bill you back for that price difference if the tariff gets dropped in 90 days, because they will do that if you don't read your vendor documentation and address this carefully. Take a look at your structure, figure out where costs can be adjusted or shifted. If you're, doing a lot of, LTL freight, or God forbid air freight or something like that, maybe changing your frequency, looking how you can consolidate loads, things like that. And last but not least, retailer responses. Well, I wish I could tell you that there was a developing retailer consistent response of here's what US retailers have said they're going to do, but it's all over the board. Some have come right out and said, there's going to be price increases, prepare for them immediately. Others, like Walmart, have said, well, they've taken a more nuanced approach and said, well, we're going to work with our suppliers and see who can share costs where, but some level of price increase will probably be passed on to the consumer. And everything in between. The major distributors, KeHE and UNFI, at least as of yesterday, to the best of my knowledge, have really not made much of a statement on the matter at all, which is kind of not a surprise because they're going to get squeezed from both ends. They're going to have, retailers pushing them in one direction. They're going to have suppliers pushing them in the other. So not a good day to be a major U.S. distributor either. But be aware of the market forces in the US, particularly as relate to Walmart and e-commerce sales through Amazon and things like that, because if you are adjusting your pricing, remember, everybody looks at everybody else. So this is why it's really important not to sort of do a knee-jerk reaction, go off half-cocked, take an arbitrary price increase, take a pause, take a deep breath, do your homework, sharpen your pencil, figure out what you actually need to survive long term, presuming that the current tariff level is here to stay for at least the next 3 years, and do it as smartly as you can. Because if you take a price increase and talk to 3 of your customers and they accept it, and then you talk to Walmart or you talk to another retailer who beats you down, and you're like, okay, well, I'll share this price and I'll share this, and then they see that Walmart's shelf price is 50 cents or $1 cheaper than what they can sell it for, you will start getting phone calls, and that gets ugly. So just be aware of how that sort of works in the US and who the price drivers are, and just make sure you do it consistently and smartly. So to make sure we have plenty of time for questions, I will pause it there. I'm sure that there are a million of them, but hopefully that gives you a sort of 10,000-foot overview of what's going on, and the edge in my voice may give you the sense that it really is chaos at the moment because no one knows what's going on or what tomorrow is going to bring.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Thank you. That was excellent. Yeah, really good just to get your insights. And yeah, I can see it's deeply ingrained in you already in such a short space of time. Seems like weeks ago it all happened, but it's just days ago. So before we move on to a general chat and some questions, at this stage I just wanted to bring in Jamie Craig, who's joined us from WTA Logistics, one of our members. I know many of you are aware of the WTA team. We thought it'd be good for Jamie to join just to sort of look at a couple of the practicalities, because we recognise this might be the first time that some of you have faced tariffs, and perhaps just a little bit of going back to basics on, when they are charged and what the cost is actually charged on, so there is clarity on that. So perhaps, Jamie, if we could kick off with that, and then perhaps move on to sort of rules of origin, because obviously proving if your product is a UK product is now essential, to ensure that we keep the 10% tariff and not a higher tariff. So yeah, do you want to sort of jump on and share your thoughts on those?
Sure, no problem. The easy thing to say is that really there's no real change apart from now there's the added 10% tariff, the added 10% duty on top of what is already there. So if there's a most favored nation duty rate already there, like a third country duty rate, this new tariff will be placed on top of that. So it's the only change to be aware of, really. There is a baseline 10% duty rate to apply on top of whatever else is already applied. and obviously the duty rate is subtracted once the entry is cleared into the US. So no major change really to the current process. It's just obviously that additional cost now that you face. In terms of proving rules of origin, there's not, as far as I'm aware, there's no change to the current process either. I imagine that might change because that'll become a hot topic going forward, especially proving proof of origin, especially if people want to export from lower tariff countries such as the UK. So I imagine a non-preferential certificate of origin will come into play for more products in the future. But at present, for food items, you'll just need to continue with the FDEA declaration statement that proves the proof of origin on there, that has the actual country of origin status on there, and obviously on the product as well. So watch this space really for proof of origin, but there's no other change there that I'm aware of right now. But as I say, I imagine that will change.
Great. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
Jamie, if I could add just one thing to that, while it is not a change because this is applied previously, one thing that folks who were coming into the U.S. without any tariff, may not be aware of. I don't know if any of you are actually buying supplies, if you're getting packaging or peanuts or soy or anything from the U.S. But do bear in mind that if you have any U.S. sourced product in your finished goods that you're sending back to the US, you can actually deduct the value of those goods as a percentage of the value of your finished product. So if you have anything going across the water from the US to the UK, then coming back as a finished or processed good, you are able to do that math, and there's all kinds of codes that are used to classify that and sort of line item them out. So Jamie can give you more details about all that, but it is something to consider that many of you might not have encountered before if you have any U.S. source product in your finished goods.
Sandra,
yeah,
it's Gary here.
Hi, Gary. Go ahead.
Actually, something that Jamie said just kind of made me think a little bit. Everybody will be aware that when you send food products into the USA, you have to do a prior notice to the FDA. Yeah. And on the prior notice, you have to put the manufacturer's registration number. It's a very important part of the actual prior notice process. So I didn't know actually until Jamie just mentioned that the prior notice indicates the country of origin of the manufacturer. I know that the registration number goes on there, but this could really be quite a problem for brand owners that are having their products made or such by somebody in Europe, for example. So we're talking here, there are a lot of British kind of brand development companies. We deal with them all the time. They don't, they work with a co-packer, and that co-packer may well be in Europe, not in the UK. So I'm just wondering how that's going to affect the rate of duty that's paid on the product when it arrives in the USA. If it's identified as coming from Europe, they're going to slap 20% on it instead of 10%.
Yep.
Just occurred to me. I don't know whether Jim or Jamie can kind of clarify on that basis.
You are spot on. We have clients in the UK that have product produced in Turkey or product produced in India. The Turkish and Indian tariff will apply when that product hits the US border. We have Asian clients. We have a client in Thailand that has product produced in Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam, and they're all over the board right now. Vietnam got hit with one of the highest tariff rates, and they are scrambling. So, yes, country of origin does matter. the country of origin rules have not changed. So, if you're substantially transforming a product, you can change country of origin. So, you don't have to line item things out sort of in the way that I said previously, where if you are getting raw ingredients from North Africa and Spain and elsewhere and turning it, you don't have to line item all those out. That's just a UK product if it's manufactured in the UK, but it has to be a certain percentage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're already familiar with country of origin rules, the rules haven't changed, but country of origin, that is what will determine your tariff rate crossing the US border.
Do you want to add anything to that, Jamie?
No, I don't think I can add anything to that. Yeah, spoke excellently. Yeah, so nothing to add to that. Definitely something to be aware of, though, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, Gary, your definition of the companies that do get a lot of goods manufactured in Europe, I think they're the ones that are going to struggle. A lot of new companies have set up in Europe to help them with the EU market, but if America's an equal share, then suddenly they've got the increased tariff. So it doesn't matter where you ship from, it's where the product is made and the rules of origin that apply that is what the basis of the tariff will be calculated on.
Yeah, sorry, there's just one last thing to mention. Again, it occurs to me that the way that the US import procedures work compared to those in the UK or Europe, obviously there's no VAT payable when goods arrive in the USA, and that tax gets levied on the goods on the products at the point of sale. So with different states having different sales tax. So I'm just thinking, however you're selling the product there through a distributor or through a directly perhaps on e-commerce or something like that, that sales tax is going to kind of compound the problem, because you're paying, the consumer will now be paying sales tax on value plus 10%, for example.
So I don't want to imply that total consumer price doesn't matter, but for sake of simplicity and just in terms of top 10 things that UK manufacturers should be worrying about, US sales tax is not on that list. I mean, it is a different system than what the UK and Europe and many other developed nations have, but kind of Americans are used to it at this point. If you live in New York, people know what their sales tax rate is versus if they live in Ohio versus if they live in Washington State. So and you guys shouldn't have to deal with that, because almost universally you're going to be either selling to a distributor, selling to an importer, or selling to a retailer, or selling to e-commerce, and your e-commerce is going to be hooked up to like Avalara or TaxJar or some other service that's doing it. So I will say that if any of you need to directly care about US sales tax, you're probably organized in a way overcomplicated way, and we should definitely talk. But aside from that, hopefully that shouldn't be a huge consideration, because while everything Gary said was true, the Americans generally don't react to price increases and say, boy, if it only wasn't for the tax, I'd buy this product. So, it's kind of not a huge concern.
And Jamie, just coming back to you on the practical side, are you seeing any delays? How long have things taken to get through since the tariffs come in? Is there any sort of feedback yet on building in extra timelines for exporters?
Yeah, I have spoken to WTA USA, and they're based in Chicago, and they have said that they've noticed no significant impacts. I mean, everybody's expecting to pay more duty now, so it's not really held up anything at the border, but that's from their perspective. I mean, Jim might have a different answer, but yeah, as far as WTA USA is concerned, it's not had an impact as yet. So
yeah, other than the initial chaos, which we expect will settle down relatively quickly. And when I say initial chaos, like what's gone on is, if you had product on the water when these tariffs were announced. You should not, in fact, have to pay that. You have to prove that it was on the water, but like, if you had something sitting off the coast of New Jersey on Saturday morning, you should not have to pay the tariff on that. But different ports were interpreting things different ways, because of all the cuts to government employees. USDA is slowed down, so if you've got a product that's subject to USDA inspection, that is generally taking a little bit longer than it used to, and as a result, we had some folks reporting that the port was trying to charge, or the customs, they were trying to charge them the duty on the tariff on a product that had been sitting in the warehouse waiting USDA clearance for like 6 days. So I mean, like stuff like that, that'll shake out, but just sort of stick to your guns and let the paperwork work itself out.
Jim, can I ask a question? Sorry, Reese from AG Bar. We had some product leave us on the 30th of March, so it was on its way. Does that mean we can try and not pay the tariff on that?
Yeah, as long as you document everything that you essentially relinquished control of that product prior to the effective date, you should be able to claim exemption from the tariff on that.
Great, brilliant. Thanks, Jim.
Great. Okay, so let's open up to anyone else that wants to ask questions. If you either just pop your hand up or turn your mic on. Yeah, it'd be good to get sort of thoughts and conversations that you've had that may or may not be different to what you've just heard, or if you've already been sort of pushed into a certain route by your US partners. So yeah, do please share. Yeah, Guy, go ahead.
Hi, Guy Tolberg, Tracklements. That was great. Thank you very much, Jim. 5 or 6 key points written down. Just want to double check that thing. And again, I think Gary mentioned it. The tariff is 10% on top of existing. And Gary asked in the side box, what were people paying on existing tariffs? So we're paying, I think, 6% on some items already going in. So we will be 16% on those items going in.
That is our current understanding. We're kind of in no man's land right now because the quote unquote reciprocal tariffs, which are nothing of the sort, don't actually take effect until tomorrow. And the government's published schedules have not been internally consistent 100% of the time. What they showed in their presentation last Thursday versus what's turned up on some government paperwork is not 100% consistent. So that is a safe presumption, and I would go with that presumption right now, but watch this space for the next 24 hours and we should actually have better clarity on that, and if there's going to be any adjustments or changes or exemptions, etc.
Okay, thank you.
Jim, can I ask another question to you? Sorry.
Yes.
In terms of the 60 and 90 days notice that KHE, UNFI, and some of the other retailers want for a price increase, because this is a tariff change, do those contracts still stand?
How good are your negotiating skills?
I would say excellent.
Yeah, when I say that this has created chaos up and down the chain, it's created chaos up and down the chain. So the thing is that, if you, like I started with my practical thing, if you need to take a price increase, take a price increase. How a given retailer or distributor, everything are going to respond is really up for grabs right now. I mean, everybody in the U.S. understands what's going on. They're all trying to protect their interest. So, KHE and UNFI have not actually officially released any sort of public statement on the matter, but I fully expect you will encounter retailers and distributors who will stick to their paperwork and say, nope, you can't do it. Some of them are now regretting things like force majeure clauses that they put into their contracts, particularly if you're doing private label, because you might have an agreed upon price, but there's a force majeure thing in there. Well, and this probably qualifies under force majeure unless it was explicitly narrowed in there. So, Reese, I wish I could give you a one-size-fits-all answer, but unfortunately, you're going to have to pick up the phone, talk to your individual customers about your specific situation, and come up with a reasonable path forward.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
I think Ella's on the call from White and Black. I don't know, Ella, if this is an area of your own expertise, whether you wanted to hop on the contract side of things. But if you are there, do feel free to to jump on.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I mean, the words force majeure, just my ears prick up, but that is just another reason to make sure that you're reading that term in any contracts that you have really clearly. And if you are considering new suppliers at any point with all of this, or indeed are a supplier, to make sure that those force majeure clauses are being read and understood. Whether or not you have any scope to negotiate them is up to the relationship between you and whoever you're contracting with, but it's always good to know where you stand right from the start in any case. And I'm here to help if anyone does want to go through any of their force majeure clauses in their contracts or anything else. Yeah, just drop me an email.
Yeah, I am not a lawyer, so it sounds like Ella might be. Talk to her. I see a question in the chat. This is a very fluid situation. Do we know where the UK government are in discussions? Sandra might be able to answer that, but I kind of want to. This will put me on a watch list in the U.S. But here's the thing: is that the current administration in the U.S. Has sort of made it very clear through both their actions and comments that they do not believe there is such a thing in this universe as a win-win situation, that in every deal there is a winner and a loser. I have a lot of family in the UK. My wife is British, so I think the UK is also well familiar with what happens when you have populist politics start dictating major public policy. So the Trump administration is desperate above all else to show their core constituency that they are winning. So my personal take is that certainly a free trade agreement with the UK is still possible, but all of these things, particularly in the short term, are going to have to be framed in such a way where the Trump administration can claim a win. That your personal politics may vary. I don't know sort of things are with Starmer and the new UK government, but like this is a very complicated situation with Canada because Canadian politics have shifted in such a way that standing up to Trump and putting the onus on Canadian politics to show that they are winning, is sort of now the mood over there. So, when you have two administrations whose legitimacy is based on bringing home a win, it makes deals really tough. So, if Starmer is smart and they're willing to just swallow their own feelings and cut a deal that's in the UK's best interests, I think it'll happen.
Yeah, and I don't have any other insights. We've got a call with DBT later this week, so if we do hear anything, we'll let you know. But I think officially the government line is yes, they're still continuing with the free trade agreement talks and hoping for success. But yeah, there isn't anything substantive to come out of that at all yet, Maria. Yeah, definitely one to watch.
Jim,
and it's always been the highest priority. It's just a case of how we get it across.
Jim, did you see? Sorry, cut across you, Sandra. Did you see the Trump's reaction to the EU's proposal for zero tariffs?
Yeah, well, I saw. Yeah,
not accepting it. I think that shows the way the wind's blowing, doesn't it, really?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think this is I'm again, wait 24 hours and ask again, because the retaliatory tariffs, which are nothing of the sort, don't go into effect until tomorrow. This is the same brinksmanship that was played with the auto tariffs and Canadian goods tariffs, and then they backed it off on USMCA. He's playing a silly buggers game right now of, if all you do is back down, then nobody takes your threat seriously. He wants this threat to be taken seriously. He wants leverage in negotiations. So, it just comes down to a matter of pain tolerance. See what happens when the S&P 500 opens today. That'll tell you how quickly they're willing to cut deals.
We've got a question in the chat from Megan about how you actually go about claiming an exemption for anything that was in transit to the US. I don't know, Jamie, is that something that you're familiar with, what the process might be? Is it something that needs to be arranged through the customs broker, or how does it work?
I'm not actually sure, to be honest. Jim might be a better place to answer that. I imagine it's just the proof of the export declaration to confirm when it was actually exported on the water.
Yeah, I don't know the mechanics of it either, because we work with customs brokers and we just provide them with all the documentation and they do their magic with CBP. Sort of again, if you if you are at any point personally dealing with CBP, you're probably arranged in way more of a complicated manner than you need to be. Customs brokers are not that expensive for the value of the service they provide. But yeah, it should just be paperwork. And this was something, again, this process hasn't changed in the sense that, there were tariffs on other products. And so, sort of claiming an exemption for things like that and for percentage of goods and all that, that hasn't changed. So it is just a paperwork issue, but unfortunately, I don't know the specifics.
Okay, so yeah, probably Megan, best to go back to who you're shipping with and raise it with them and get clarity on that. And if anyone else does get success in that area, perhaps they could share that with everyone, just so we can share that advice with members on another call.
So a question just come in. We have a wholly owned entity in the USA. So yeah, so this is actually kind of the Opal Group model. The clients that we work with, we help them open up a US entity, and then their overseas manufacturer sells to the US entity, and then the US entity sells to all of the US customers. So that is sort of the primary model that we work under. And what you just asked there about, can we consider reducing our margins, introducing a marketing allowance? You're thinking one level too low in the sense of tariff minimization. So marketing allowances would not generally be included in the tariff calculation, but what you are talking about is transfer pricing. And what has to be included and excluded in transfer pricing when you sell from your UK entity to your US entity is, again, where you need to get some legal advice. But, as I mentioned in my initial presentation, it is quite common for companies to capture some margin when selling that. So, if your wholesale price is $3, and your manufacturing cost is $1, it's pretty common that if you sell to an importer, you're selling for $3, but if you sell to your US entity, you'd sell for $2, capture some of that margin so your costs are covered, and then any profit or loss sits in the US entity. So yeah, you have a great deal of flexibility in adjusting your transfer pricing within the law. You don't want to go too low, and certainly you don't want to go below cost, because then you're basically committing tax evasion, and that's not good. But if you are taking margin when you're selling to your U.S. entity, yes, you have the ability to reduce that margin, which will reduce the tariffable amount.
Very good. And then another question's coming in about the USMCA. Is that the US Mexico Canada agreement?
Right.
I'm guessing.
Yeah. So USMCA, formerly NAFTA. If you are co-packing in Mexico and bringing in right now, yes. So it's not so much claiming an exemption unless all they're really doing is, if they're just packaging it. So like if essentially your country of origin under the country of origin rules is still the UK, then no, I'm not aware of any exemption that you're going to be able to bring in a UK product under the USMCA.
Sorry, it's to do it. So we buy in toasted sesame from Mexico in bulk, and we pack it in the UK. So when we ship it out to the US, we claim the country of origin is still Mexico, because we haven't changed the product; we've just packaged it.
Okay, so it's the other way around.
It's the other way around. So customers are saying, we think you might be able to claim that, but I'm just not really sure.
Yeah, so I mean that would be the same as claiming U.S. products. So USMCA, they is still in effect, after the on again, off again, on again, off again tariffs of a month ago, which seems like years ago. So if you have, if you were already covered by USMCA, so in other words, if there's been no duty in the past, and your country of origin was Mexico, then that probably does still apply, and it would basically be the same paperwork that you would be filling out as though you were buying it from the US. You have USMCA covered product that just happens to be transshipped and packed through the UK. So yes, you should be able to claim an exemption on that. Again, unfortunately, I can't tell you specifically how to do it, but a customs broker can absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. But Jim, just
Sandra,
while we're on
sorry,
that, oh
Sandra,
yeah,
sorry,
go
just a
ahead.
thought
Sorry.
from my side. Sorry, Ben from Ecotone.
Hey, Ben.
Yeah.
Hi, Jim. Nice to see you again. It sounds like, as you said, 24 hours, there'll be more clarity on whether the 10% is incremental. I just wondered, because we had the same question, I assume others have. Is it worth maybe the FDA just sending an email to members specifically on that point once we have full clarity on whether it is going to be a plus or incremental on the 10% or even the 20 from Europe? Obviously, we have both tariffs affecting us. That's kind of crucial for us then about whether we do anything on price or how far we go on price. That makes a huge difference.
Oh, yeah, sure. The advice we got was that it's 10% on top of anything existing. So I haven't heard anything to the contrary. But as Jim said, that they're, if they're getting the paperwork in place, that might change. But as of today, it is whatever it was plus 10%. We've been told that. So yeah, I think we'll watch it for a couple of days with Jim and get something out should anything come to the contrary. But I think in terms of planning for now, that's as it is as it stands today.
Yeah, and so here's the sort of corollary to that as well, where I would, in the short term, presume 100% that is the case, because while you would certainly expect that if an American administration was going to blow up the entire, global trade system, that they would have done all the paperwork and figured out how this was all going to work. But in fact, they did not. They threw out a number, and that number wasn't even calculated correctly by the legal, by the economic sources that they cited. So, how things are going to stack and, quotas and dairy and everything like that is really not at all clear. So the going presumption is that starting tomorrow, everything is just going to stack, presume the highest applicable tariff rate. Now, whether that's going to come down in the intervening days and weeks as additional clarity is gained and things are on there. So, if you already, if you have a shipment that is, preparing to be picked up tomorrow, well, you might be in a tough spot, but if you can wait a week before you send your next 40-foot container, and there should be more clarity on whether or not things are going to be carved out or if it's going to be 100% stackable and so on and so forth.
Great, thank you, Jim. It was interesting. I was up at the Food and Drink Expo in Birmingham yesterday, and it was interesting talking to a couple of people who have found that their Canadian partners have been in touch looking for product. I think the sort of anti-US sentiment and the tariffs they've been hit with as well are sort of impacting supplies, a bit like you were saying earlier, Jim, about finding, diversification of suppliers. So I think it'll be interesting to see if that does throw opportunities your way. Big interesting one to watch.
Well, and an interesting thing as well there, just FYI, to the best of my knowledge, none of this has changed. But if you are looking to sell product to Canada or Mexico, and you already have a U.S. entity, I'm sorry, someone earlier mentioned that they already had a U.S. entity in there. You don't have to spin up a Canadian operation as well. You can actually fill out a piece of paper to make your U.S. entity what's called a non-resident importer for Canada. So you can actually import product directly into Canada using your U.S. entity as the importer of record into Canada. It doesn't have to be transshipped through the U.S. You can send it from the U.K. directly to Canada if you're registered as a non-resident importer.
Yeah, very good. Good advice. Good. Any other questions or insights anyone wants to share? Conversations they've had? I think we've covered an awful lot. I think it's given clarity where we can. So yeah, thanks for that, Jim.
I'll make one more unsolicited comment about contract manufacturing, since you mentioned there. A lot of people have asked us in the last week about whether or not they should consider having their product co-manned in the U.S. And that is a difficult question, and your mileage may vary. And there's a number of key reasons why that is. One, because you have to bear in mind that, as I mentioned, everybody's prices are going up. A lot of the contract packagers in the U.S. source ingredients from overseas. So those ingredients are still going to be subject to tariff, particularly if you have fruits, vegetables, perishable product included in your manufacturing process, and everybody has spices et cetera, et cetera. So don't forget, manufacturing in the U.S. is not going to necessarily exempt you from tariffs. The second thing is that co-packer capacity in the U.S. is basically already running at redline. It is very difficult to get production line time and space in the U.S. Right now, and unfortunately, in fact, a number of our clients have actually been kicked out of their U.S. co-packer in the last year just because there's other folks waiting in the wing who can offer higher margin, higher volume production runs. So, unless you are personally attempting to build a production facility somewhere in the U.S. and run your own manufacturing operation here, just be aware, running out and desperately trying to find a contract packager in the U.S. until you take a look at the costs and where your raw ingredients are coming from and so on and so forth. It may or may not. If you were manufacturing product in India, it's going to make a lot more sense than companies who are manufacturing in the UK, quite frankly. So, just take a look at that before you knee jerk into a bad arrangement, because contract packaging in the US is really at a premium and quite expensive at the moment.
Yeah, good advice. And Shoaib, I think from James White, do you just want to ask your question? It's quite long. Do you want to just pop your microphone on and ask your question? Something around
Hello,
sharing
hi,
distribution.
everyone. Can you hear me? Hi. Yes.
Yes.
I know this is a conversation about the tariffs, but the question I was asking was if there is a member who I can actually just have a chat about the logistics. We are just re-rationalizing all our customers because some of the West Coast customers are a bit unprofitable for us with these tariffs coming in, and we might not be making a margin. So we just want to re-rationalize everything and probably move the storage from Pennsylvania elsewhere. So just wondering if there is someone who has a bit of experience with logistics I can actually speak to.
Jamie,
well,
do you...
yeah, I gotta say Jamie, or we have teams. It sounds like you sort of already know what you need to do, and that's Jamie, you want to address that before I chime in with anything?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, we have our WTA US team that would be happy to help there. Certainly, I can put you in contact with them.
Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Great.
this is obviously a much longer conversation, but what a lot of UK manufacturers don't realize when they come into the US is they can actually cost you more to send your product from New Jersey to California than it costs to send it from the UK to New Jersey. And in some cases, depending on the product, considerably more. So having a reasonable supply chain layout in the US, that's one of the reasons why the Chicago area tends to be one of the biggest warehousing and shipping markets in the US, because it gives you sort of nice even kind of pricing to most regions. If you're doing a lot of West Coast business, we generally don't recommend companies open up a second warehouse until you have at least 25 or 30 million in US sales. You should be able to do it from a single warehouse unless you have a highly perishable product. But opening up a second warehouse if you've got a lot of business might make sense. Big long conversation separate from anything we're talking about today.
Thank you.
Perhaps if you both pop your emails in the chat, then people can reach out to both you, Jamie, and Jim, if they're not familiar. And a reminder, members, you can connect through the portal as well. If you log into the member portal, everyone's contact is there under members, so you can all reach out to each other or follow up on the conversations. Good. I think we've got time for probably one more question, if there was another one. Oh, I've got a little flash has come up. That's just the emails, isn't it? Yeah, good. Yeah, and Jim, that co-packer thing I think is really interesting. I know it's something we've talked about before, right? The co-packing versus building your own facility. So there are lots of options, but as we say, I think all of this is sort of short term whilst the dust settles. But conversations that can be had about the bigger picture once we know the longer term position for UK exporters. So yeah, thanks very much for all your insights. Did either of you want a closing word before we wrap up, or shout now with your question if you've been sitting quiet?
It's easy for me to say, but having dealt with as much of this as I have over the last 4 days, and it's shocking to believe it's only 4 days. It feels like it's been forever. But take a deep breath and don't panic. I mean, amongst other things, you are in good company. The UK got the minimum tariff rate of anyone in the world. The US is still an enormous market. And the one thing that, I will say is, if you look at the pandemic, if you look at the 2008, 2009 financial crisis, one thing that does tend to stand true is that in tough economic times, people can't necessarily go on that big vacation. They can't necessarily go out and buy a new flashy car. And so when they treat themselves, what do? They buy higher end food products. They treat themselves with, something nice that they can have at home. So, there's always a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, and there's still an opportunity, particularly in the space specifically covered by the FDEA, where, no matter how bad things get, you might have to raise your pricing, you might have to go super premium, you might have to adjust your mix, et cetera, et cetera. But, the US is still a huge market, and there's still opportunity even in bad times. So, don't panic, be strategic, sharpen your pencils. There's still a lot going on.
Perfect summary. Thank you, Jim. No, that's great. And thank you all very much for joining. I hope that was interesting, and I appreciate that it's a challenging time for everybody. But as Jim said, we're all in good company. I think it is a global issue. If you have got strong partners, I think it really does reinforce the importance of having the right partners in market with whom you can communicate and agree good way forward. And please do share anything with us that comes up, because we do have the ear of government and want to make sure that we feed anything in to them that's relevant. And talking of which, they have actually just issued I can't remember what they've called it. It's like a call for input on potential retaliatory tariffs. So there is, if you look in gov.uk and type in US tariffs, it pops up as a call for input, and they're seeking input from manufacturers on what you are bringing in from the US and where that might be impacted should anything from the UK be added into the tariff quotas and stuff. So yeah, look out for that as well. And we will be meeting on Friday. Friday is our member meetup, so I guess we can pick up this conversation then as well. If anything else springs to mind, do jump on that call on Friday and we can pick it up then. As Jim said, there are still opportunities, and I know the PS8 team, they're busy out in Singapore this week, and there are still opportunities to get involved in the US trade shows that are coming up. Summer Fancy Food Show, Expo West next year for 26, the private label show in Chicago. So if you're joining this as someone that's still looking to build the US, do reach out to Karen or Rachel at the PS8 team, and we can talk through some of the opportunities. There's plenty of US shows to keep you all busy, and we've got some good sort of packages around those that we can pass on to you. So we'll wrap it up there. Thank you, Jim. That was great. Thank you very much, Jamie. Good to have your expertise as well. Do reach out to either of them. And yeah, we'll see some of you again on Friday, and keep in touch. Thank you. All the best.